Hey, it's Rod Yates here. Welcome to Mastering Events, an Audience Republic podcast. Each episode, I'll be talking to some of the world's most accomplished event professionals to discover how they got where they are today, the lessons they've learned throughout that journey, and their insights around event marketing and maximizing ticket sales. My guest today is Dale Ballentine, Director of Ticketing Operations at Eventim. Dale is a 2-decade-plus veteran of the ticketing world, having worked with Ticketmaster, Nation, Motorsport Tickets, and now Eventim, where he's managed the ticketing operations for the London, Rio, and now Paris Olympics. And to think, it all started with a job in the box office at his local cinema in Durham in the UK. We cover it all in this interview, but we started by talking about Dale's path into the industry and whether there's a history of events in his family.
No, quite the opposite. My dad was a coal miner, so I come from a long succession of coal miners. And my mother, she's incredibly creative and can really put her hand to anything. So she's done a lots of little jobs along her way. But no, never. And I mean, as a kid, I think the local workingmen's club took us to maybe a couple of pantos, but from a relatively poor area, so never really got out to see any events until I was kind of 17, 18.
What was the first one? Do you remember?
You see, I knew embarrassing questions like this were going to come up. My first concert that I remember was Steps at Newcastle.
Steps!
Yeah. And it was actually a group of us from the cinema who decided to pull together and go to Newcastle for the night.
And the die was cast.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But again, and it's still something I do to this day. Events, people can't relax and watch events, right? But even from the first time, I remember sitting there and thinking, I sell a couple of thousand tickets if we're lucky in a day at the cinema, and just starting to think about the logistics behind getting all of these people into a venue, and I think that is really what kickstarted the career that I've had now for nearly 24 years since I started working in the cinema.
What was your first experience of actually starting to work with numbers of that size, so bigger than selling perhaps 1,000 tickets to the cinema during the day? What was the first event that you were involved in where the numbers were really big?
It wasn't really until I started working at Ticketmaster and started working on festivals. And I think one of the early on sales I did was Download Festival. I think that was maybe one of the first things I was ever involved with. And,
right.
That's a complex event with multiple days and multiple zones. And yeah, that was definitely a big adjustment from anything I'd ever worked on before that.
What were you perhaps most surprised about when you did work on an event, the scale of download?
I remember how quickly the tickets sold. I can remember thinking, we've just sold 100,000 tickets and it's not even lunchtime. Yeah. And again, I think the complexity, looking from an outsider, it's just a lot of people in the field, right? But actually, it's much more than that. It's so complicated and there's so many people involved that I think that was really the surprise, thinking of how easy it is just to sell a general admission event, to actually looking at the complexity of what goes into actually not just selling the tickets, but the whole event. Being on site at festivals in the early days is where I learned a lot about organisation and customer service and lots of different things that I think people don't realise go into big events or any event in that matter.
Yeah. Were there any just absolute truths that you learned back there that, despite all the technological innovations, still really remain true?
Attention to detail. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, is that as much as the industry moves fast, and especially with rock and pop, I mean, there are days where we got stadium shows 2 days before they went on sale. And it's very easy to feel the pressure to get this stuff done. But yeah, I think attention to detail, especially in ticketing, but again, across every aspect of running events, if you don't actually sit and think about things, it'll definitely come back to bite you at the event time. And I think, again, that's something that has stuck with me all of this time, is check and double check, and then get somebody else to check and double check everything that you
Right.
do.
When you look at your career and some of the places you've worked, such as Live Nation, Ticketmaster, Motorsport Tickets, Eventim, you've been involved in some incredible events throughout that career. You know, things such as, I believe, the 2015 Rugby World Cup, several Olympics, including, I think, the Paris Olympics this year. And you've worked with many high-profile artists as well across that time. What would you say are some of your career-defining moments?
There's so many. I've been so lucky to work with some great artists and also some big name artists, and the Venn diagram doesn't always cross between between that. But I will not mention names. A couple of things that really stand out were, again, early in my Ticketmaster career, when I was still learning everything. The first event that I ever really managed on site from a ticket point of view was the Nelson Mandela tribute concert in Hyde Park, which was just something special. And the fact that I found myself in a situation whilst doing ticket returns where I met Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela backstage, and there are artists and then there are legends of
Yeah.
history that really stands out. And then the open of the O2 as well, the run of events that Prince did down there. Such a great idea, such a learning curve as well. And then I think the other example is obviously the Olympics. I'm currently based in Paris. I'm here to work on the Paris Olympics with Eventim. This is Summer Olympics number 3. Definitely the biggest, most complex, most political events I've ever worked on. But you don't really get much bigger than the Olympics. The sheer volume of tickets and what we have for the Olympics, 750 events that take place over 2.5 weeks. Everything goes into making that work. The logistics are absolutely incredible. But I love it. I absolutely love the pressure, and I love the fact that there's so much going on, and the fact that I still learn. And I think that's a takeaway from everything that I've worked on, is that if I'm not learning, I'm bored. So, I've been very lucky
Right.
that along the way I'm still learning, and there are still new things to discover, new ways of doing things.
I was going to ask you about the logistics, particularly the Olympics. I think you put a post on LinkedIn several weeks ago pointing to a feature which had been written, which said something like 6.8 million tickets to the Paris Olympics had already been sold. So that, I guess that feature came out in around early June. Where do you even start with those sorts of numbers? And similarly, with the marketing of those events as well. I mean, do you find, does the Olympics sell itself? Do certain events sell themselves and certain events need a little bit of more of a marketing push? How does that work?
Yeah, the logistics of it are, again, the attention to detail. We gather all of the data from the Olympic Committee and make sure that everything is ready. And we really stress test the systems. The system that I currently work on, the event system, is incredibly robust, but we want to test every scenario we can, because again, when it comes to that on sale time, we don't want to disappoint people. We want to just make sure that we get in there and sell tickets. And yeah, I mean, an incredible feat. We sell everything general admission first, so it's general admission by price category, so that we don't have to worry about having all of the venues ready this far in advance. And with the Olympics, there's lots of temporary venues as well. So
Right.
we do everything as blind as we can now, and you see the assignment later on. Testing everything, checking everything is really what we spend a lot of time doing for something like the Olympics. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
then I think from marketing, I think it's a really interesting one. Yes, there are absolutely certain events that sell themselves. Men's 100-meter finals, for example. You don't even have to tell anyone about that event, and it's sold out. But I think marketing is definitely something that's required, not even for, I'm not going to name sports that I don't particularly
Sure.
think are interesting, but there are certain sports that struggle. It's really key that there is a marketing and awareness put out about those events. I'd have heard a lot that, well, the Olympics just sell themselves, and to an extent, yes, but maybe if we're not even looking at traditional marketing, there's a lot of PR that goes out about the Olympics as well. But from a marketing point of view, absolutely, and the data that we collect, and the data that we have as a business, and the data the IOC hold. The IOC have data from way back. They collect the data from every Olympics. So, all of that together with PR, yeah, absolutely, it's much more important than you would imagine.
Yeah, and that data, is that things such as previous ticket buyers, or does that not apply as much in an event that literally is global? So it can be in Sydney one year, and then Paris several events later. Does the ticketing data, like previous purchasing data, does it still have value even though it's so spread around the world?
It does, and I think it's really to 65% of your tickets will probably come from the country where the Olympics have been held, and 65-70% of the tickets are relatively easy to sell. But yes, I think where the importance comes in is that 30%. So how do we ensure that wherever the Olympics are held, the North Americans and the Europeans, who tend to be the biggest spectators of international sports, how we get information to them to make sure that they know what's available and how to buy tickets, etc. So that's where I think the wider databases definitely come into play. And also using the data for lookalikes as well. We can see what type of person goes to see a certain event, and then it's how do we use that data with social media and existing databases to pull in and then strip out the most relevant customers.
Right. So segmenting is really, really important in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Okay. You touched on very briefly that sometimes things don't always go right. In a career as long as yours, I'm sure that there perhaps have been events that you've worked on that didn't go to plan, or perhaps even a mistake was made on your behalf that you learned from. Have there been events like that? And what were the learnings that you actually took out of it?
Yeah, and maybe I can think of two examples, and maybe the first example is a little bit more anecdotal than actually learnings, but the infamous episode where I made a spelling mistake on one of the London 2012 tickets. So, so the cycling time trials went out as time trails, and I was unfortunately picked up by the press at the time. London 2012 tickets, and we had a lot of. I think we did a fantastic job, but lots of controversy, lots of media attention around it, and we certainly could have done without me drawing attention to it. But again, I think the learning from that is don't do ticket text at 2:00 in the morning, and don't send anything to print without making sure that you triple checked everything.
That's it.
And and I think
it's that attention to detail.
Exactly, and I think that's a little bit of a recurrent theme with what I'm talking about. It's absolutely attention to detail. I still meet people who make fun of me for that.
How long did it take for you to be able to laugh at that mistake?
I think that definitely took me at least until the end of 2012 to start to start laughing about it. But
wait. Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
Oh, I think you mentioned that there were two occasions.
Yeah.
If you're happy to go into the second one.
Absolutely. The second one isn't so much ticketing, but when I worked at the Alexander Theatre, we had obviously theatre, generally theatre shows, but it was a great little venue for rock and pop. It was quite an intimate venue, and we had maybe a slightly heavier rock band than we're used to performing in the theatre, and within 5 minutes of them going on stage, I'm called down, and pretty much everyone who was up in the balconies had found their way down to the stalls, and bless them, but the the quite elderly women we had working on the doors to take tickets couldn't really hold back hundreds of heavy rock fans. I think the learning from that is, it was a bit of an unknown show, so again, do some research, and the ladies who tore tickets for Greece, so maybe it's not the same ladies who can control a rock and pop or a heavy metal band crowd.
So when you think about your work at Eventim in particular, you've been involved in myriad innovations. There are just a couple I have here, which is, the fan bonus scheme, which I think came out in 2017, where you would reward customers for purchasing tickets with cashback vouchers, and fan sale in 2018, which was, I guess, a fan-to-fan resale site where the tickets would be sold at fair prices. And then 2019, you employed an AI-based marketing tool, which really sort of sped up the email marketing process. What do you see? I mean, obviously, there's significant changes, but what do you see as some of the most significant changes or advancements that you've observed in the industry over your career?
Yeah, I think resale is definitely an interesting subject, and tickets and people will talk about resale forever, and there's a lot of very different opinions out there, but I think the attitude to resale has, I wouldn't say changed. I think we tend to go round in circles a little bit. Resale was the Wild West 20-15 years ago. I remember working box offices and people would come up with a confirmation email from a secondary site, and he'd be like, yeah, sorry, there's no tickets for you. We're not affiliated. Yeah. There's no tickets. Then resale started to come a little bit into the primary when Ticketmaster bought Get Me In and Seatwave. I think that was kind of the first real major change. And Eventim run fan sale as well. So, I think bringing secondary and primary together was much better for the fan, because if nothing else, you knew that the tickets being sold on there were genuine, and that was always a big problem. And I think that's really why resale still has negative connotations, because you're talking about speculative ticketing and you're talking about fake tickets, which if you're not affiliated with the primary seller or the artist or the promoter or the sports team, then it's almost impossible to control. So I think I'm definitely seeing a bigger connection, a bigger joining of forces. And even, the StubHubs of the world now have access to APIs which can go in and check the validity of tickets. I think that's a big step forward for the fan. The controls and pricing are interesting, because it really depends on where you are in the world and how dominant you are in the market as well. But in the UK, Ticketmaster C and Eventim really within kind of 2 or 3 months of each other all launched fair price resale. That's really what the partners wanted, was some way to make sure that fans weren't ripped off and that tickets were genuine. But on the flip side of that, as with everything in life, something is worth what somebody will pay for it. There's the fine line between making sure that genuine fans get to see the artists that they love. Absolutely. But I think around that, and again, I think going back to how we use data, I think is how we do that, but also how we price tickets so that we can price out secondary. Ticketmaster in their platinum offering, I think is again a nice step towards that. A majority of your tickets are at face value, and then there's names on tickets, etc., to make sure that these are the genuine fans who we don't want to price out. But if you have the money and you want to see the event in good seats, and if you want a bit of hospitality, then there's a price for that. And I think there's absolutely a place on events for that. It's definitely a balance of, obviously making money is what most people are there to do,
Right.
but also keeping your fans happy. And I think pricing is one of the things to look at. And I think it's, as we understand it more and have the data to back it up. And again, being able to take data from secondary sites to look at, what are people are willing to pay for this, and then trying to price out secondary or flood the secondary market with primary tickets. And again, when the ticketing companies have control of primary and secondary, things like that are much easier to do. And I do think that it's a long journey, but I think that we really have started on the road of offering as much of what people are looking for, and to be as fair as possible, and to make sure that genuine fans get to see the events that they really want to see.
Yeah, I mean the pricing strategy discussion is so interesting. Over the years of your experience and looking at trying to strike that right balance between maximizing revenue but also ensuring accessibility to fans, are there any other lessons that you've learned in addition to what you just mentioned there in terms of the role that data plays?
I think understanding your audience and understanding, again, the restrictions. So, absolutely there are some events where the event organizers make it incredibly difficult for you to not just resell tickets but also get into the event. I think there are maybe certain cases of overkill.
What are
But
you referring to there?
yeah, I think when it comes to the ingress of the event, I think we've tried a lot of different ways to make sure that, again, that tickets are locked down to an actual fan. Or if you're if this is your ticket, to make sure that it's locked down to you. And again, I see a few different arguments for this, but in my experience, there are definitely events where we've gone too far. Tickets have been so locked down that it makes life a lot more difficult for the fan. Even the individual names on tickets, the fact that you have to show photo ID, sounds sensible, relatively straightforward, until you're trying to get 25,000 people into an event in a small space of time, and you've got children, which you can't record certain information about children. Not everyone has photo ID either, so I think we need to really try to find a balance somewhere. And also, I think mistakes have been made in the past where we've really restricted the transfer of tickets. So if you genuinely can't go to an event, why should you be penalised because there are some bad actors out there? I think everything we do in ticketing is really trying to strike a balance between shutting out the bad actors and making sure people don't make large profits off events where they don't own the rights to, etc. But also making sure that it's live events is very emotive, and you're spending lots of money to go and enjoy yourself. And if we just put barriers all the way until you get to your seat, then it takes out the enjoyment. Everyone should be hyped up and ready to go. And I think we need to limit some of the barriers. But then I think future technology has a lot to play with that as well.
Is that things such as biometrics, for example? You hear a lot about that with things like venue access and Amazon's one palm recognition service. And is a biometric something that you see playing more of a role in ticketing an event and venue access going forward? And particularly with something like the Olympics, using that as an example of an event that has a lot of people coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited to see what the next few years hold with biometrics. And it's, again, trying to get a solution that's not too invasive but also reduces the fact that you have to bring your passport to a gig. It's And obviously things like facial recognition is something that we've been experimenting with at Eventim as well. GDPR has a lot to play with that, and actually how we hold people's personal data, etc. But for the ability to upload a photo or take a photo of yourself on your phone and then be recognized when you get to the venue and allowed in, I think, again, that sounds great. Absolutely. But I understand that, data regulations and people's willingness to give this kind of data as well. Do people trust ticketing companies? Probably, I would say. I think there are many reasons they don't like ticketing companies, but I don't think anyone particularly distrusts us. So, we're not gonna sell your biometrics to a foreign government.
Right.
But people are still wary. But and maybe that's a generational thing as
Sure.
well. I mean, you're so used to on the iPhone using your face to unlock your phone. So
Hmm.
really, why should that be any different to be the passport into the event? Maybe it's even simpler. We all have our phones with us all of the time. Mobile ticketing is getting there, and I think as an industry we've been quite slow to adopt mobile ticketing. That's been around in the airline industry for a lot longer. So I think mobile ticketing is a nice step forward, but the ability to tie your identity in with your phone and just a swipe of your phone, or even the fact you've got your phone in your pocket, is then something to be recognized with. I think, to me, that's the middle ground between us scanning your face and taking fingerprints to actually recognizing you. I think the mobile device is something that I see a lot of innovation in the next few years with. Absolutely.
Okay.
Just again to make it easier and more secure.
Sure. Last thing on biometrics, do you think so? It sounds like you think it's inevitable. If you were to put a time frame on it, when do you think that will be adopted in the mainstream and more widespread?
I don't know. Like I said, I think we're relatively slow to take up on some things. We're great innovators on certain things, but
Yeah.
like facial recognition that airports use, for example. I think we'll start to see some smaller events. I think people are really keen to test all of this.
Hmm.
So I would say within the next couple of years, I think we'll start to see maybe some more tests in the real world of some kind of biometrics, and whether that's fingerprints or palm prints or facial recognition. And I know that there are access control teams as I speak looking at the possibility of all of this. To put a time frame where we will all go to the FA Cup final and our faces are just the ticket. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't see, I don't, I don't see that in the next 10 years. But you never
Right.
know.
If when you're advising your clients on these are the key things you must do if you really want to maximize ticket conversions and fan engagement. If you were just to say, all right, these are the top two or three things that you must have in place to really maximize your fanning that those ticket conversions, what would you say?
I think know your audience is probably the biggest, and then that stems off into maybe there's a couple of other areas, but I think understanding your audience, and that's right down to which venue you're going to play, what capacity venue you're going to play, but then it looks at pricing as well. And I think I've alluded to a couple of times. I think we're good at holding a lot of this data, but actually bringing it all together and putting it to a practical use is something that really still only marketing teams use to target and look alike audiences, etc. But I think it has a much bigger part to play when you can pull in access control data. And if you're a venue owner, to even bring in merchandise and F&B data and everything just to make smarter decisions, to make sure that the fan has a good time. And if you know from previous events that generally these people will do this, and then this group of people will do that, and we know that if we want to bring this certain audience, then this is where we need to target. And I think at the moment we're quite good at looking at previous events and seeing how much tickets were, and then add a little bit on. I think there's a little bit. It's a start of use of data, but I really would like to see people using analytics a bit more than they currently do.
What role does things like minimizing checkout friction play in maximizing sales? I've spoken with people and they've said just the fact that you have to create an account with the ticketing company can be enough to lose you that sale. Well, what are you seeing in terms of best practices for reducing that checkout friction?
Yeah, and I think absolutely right. We've done a lot of work in minimizing checkout. In the past 10 years, there's been at least two steps removed from checkout to make it as fast and seamless as possible. Again, I think it really depends on the event. If it's a big popular artist, people will sit and fill in whatever you tell them to fill in to get the tickets. But it's more the, should we go to the theatre? Oh, halfway through, okay, I'm giving up now. Absolutely.
Okay.
And again, I think it's about balance. There are certain information from a customer you need. You need to know who they are and how they're paying. And then for certain events, there are more things you need. Sports, I think we record probably a bit more information, marketing preferences, etc., which are important. But then also we, to introduce something like quick checkout is great, where you just really take an email address, but then as an event owner, you're not really capitalizing on the data you could have got. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, I think there are still certain platforms out there that require you giving far too much information for an event. And then when you come to rock and pop, etc., you want to sell tickets as quickly as possible, but then I think the step after that is, let them use self-checkout, but we're not going to give you the tickets unless you give us more data about you. I think maybe that is probably my preferred option, is to get people through checkout,
right,
get the money in the bank, make sure the tickets are sold at the right time, and then go back to the customer and try to gather a bit more information, which then you can use for things like traffic management, especially at something like the Olympics. We spend a lot of time looking where people are coming from. And like I said, about 65% come from the same country. But then, you've got a good percentage of people then who are then flying in and where they're coming from, and working with the governments and working with local transport, etc., to make sure that they are prepared, that we're going to have 5,000 people coming from the Netherlands for this event. So, which route are they likely to take, and how do we make all of that as seamless as possible as well? And that's something that we do a lot of work on the Olympics, because if you can imagine, the logistics are huge, of bringing people in from all over the world and to make sure that everyone's prepared.
Absolutely. You must have learned a lot about customer behavior over the years, and, why they buy tickets, how they buy tickets, what appeals to them, what turns them off. Is there any sort of really just common things that jump out to you about customer behavior and how that's perhaps even changed over the years?
Yeah, I think, first of all, don't make things too complicated. Rock and pop tends to sell really quickly, as does big sport events. So let's not put 10 price categories in there where you have to read through to understand what you're purchasing, etc. For theatre, I think it's fine. It's a little bit of a slower, more considered sale. But, rock and pop, my favourite artists on sale, get in there and buy tickets. Try to simplify things, I think, first of all. And I think the changes, obviously, is the mobile device, right? Most people now buy tickets on mobile, and I remember, when 2007, when I started at Ticketmaster, we knew an on sale was busy because the call center had jammed lines. And you know, it's even hard to think about some use cases now where people would want to call a call center and wait in a queue and buy tickets, right? I mean, you've got most people have a mobile phone, and I think that's the quickest way to do it. So I think we went from call center heavy through internet through now to phone, and I think it's important for us to try to keep as much of the experience in one place. And again, you're used to doing that with an airline. You download the airline's app, and then you buy your tickets, and you have your tickets, and you have all the information in the app. And I think that is really where everything has come to now. Huge majority of people now can buy tickets on their mobile. And I think, again, there are companies out there who have really neglected the user experience on mobile as well. A lot of ticketing software out there was built for, well, I mean, some of it wasn't even built for the internet, but the e-commerce platforms out there were built for desktop and then have been adjusted to be able to work on mobile. And I think really the focus from everyone really now should be mobiles first, not mobile friendly.
I imagine that can have a huge impact on conversions as well, just making that user experience really friendly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dale, before you go, I have to ask about meeting Nelson and Winnie Mandela. What did you have an opportunity to speak with them?
It was all just a handshake with them both, and he said that he loved the event. So no, not a conversation. I never got to any pearls of wisdom from him or anything else, unfortunately. But just such a special time that really sticks with you. One of the great things in life. And like I say, worked with many artists, met a lot of people, but really the Mandelas were the ones who stood out.
Well, look, Dale, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Thank you once again.
Absolutely. No, anytime.